Well, Andrew is an extraordinary person, and I think he's got the highest degree of intellectual integrity in this movement at the moment. I'm really standing out to say that, because what he's doing takes enormous courage and dedication, and he's doing it extremely well. Some of it's down to the fact that he's a natural educator, so he's able to explain quite complex ideas in a way that people can understand, which is a great gift, so that's going for him. But then also he's got a master of the technology, so that's another skill that he brings to it. So all his information is well researched, well sourced, and well presented on the page or the disc or whatever medium he's using. So he's a tremendous asset to this whole movement, and the tragedy of it is that so many people are blocking their ears to what he's saying because there are other people out to discredit him. And this is where his courage comes in, because he just keeps right on going, and he will get there, and more people are realising what he and Dr. Wood are saying actually is the scientific truth.
You're coming up with an awful lot of these silly theories that I mean, we all know that the Twin Towers were blown up by an evil conspiracy of nasty people run by George Bush, and that's the accepted theory.
Yes.
Right? The accepted theory is, let's ignore what the politicians have told us about what happened to 9/11, because we all know that's such fiction and baloney. So then we got the real conspiracy theory, where it was hit by two planes and blown up by thermite, and the whole lot just collapsed. Right.
That's right.
You have a tendency to totally sold on that one.
No, I mean, just to set a little bit of context, yeah, we've got the official story of the Al-Qaeda terrorists, you know, the Muslims gone bad, plus, you know, lapses in American security, that caused the events. Then we have this story that there were either bombs in the World Trade Center towers, or there was thermite. You know, there's been this whole swathe of 9/11 truthers talk about thermite, and indeed I have to confess that I used to be one of them. I even helped this Steve Jones character editor a video together which showed this thermite in action, supposedly dripping out of the towers of the World Trade Center. But without going into too much detail, I eventually found out that this guy, Steve Jones, was connected to the cold fusion affair of the late 80s, and he was involved in publishing a paper about cold fusion research, which essentially put you know, the work of Pons and Fleischmann, compromised that, because he was talking about something similar. Steve Jones starts coming out saying 9/11 was an inside job, but actually what happened is thermite was planted in the towers, and that's what melted the steel, cut through the steel, and the buildings fell down because of that. So first he said it was thermite, and I thought, oh yeah, he's a physicist, he's worked at Los Alamos, he must know what he's talking about because he's got a PhD in physics. And then as I listened to what he said more carefully, and as I got in touch with another lady called Dr. Judy Wood, who pointed out that there was this problem over what Jones had said about aluminium, molten aluminium. Jones claimed that molten aluminium was liquid, silvery at all temperatures in daylight conditions. In other words, however much you heat aluminium up and it becomes molten, it will always be silvery in appearance. This is false. In other words,
so this is because the outer casing of the building is a lot of aluminium
yes,
in it, but the inner casing steel.
Steel, correct. So what we thought he was trying to do was cover up the issue that the steel and the aluminium turned to dust as the towers were destroyed. And they had to get in this idea of molten metal and heat, because that's associated with explosives and thermite. When you study the World Trade Center evidence that was being compiled by Dr. Wood, the key thing that comes out is that there was very little or no heat. In other words, that level of destruction happened with almost no heat. And in fact, if we look at the evidence,
cold explosion.
Yeah, it wasn't an explosion.
A scalar signature.
Possibly scalar. We don't know. I don't use the term scalar myself because it's got various definitions, and you know, you read things like Tom Bearden and all these other people, and you can't quite get a grip of what the definition actually is. Not in terms of our current science. But what I will say is that we're looking at a new type of technology, because what can turn steel to dust? And that's the basic fact when you look at the World Trade Center evidence. You know, just put the Pentagon and all that on one side.
It have to be some kind of high-speed molecular resonance.
That's what we think. It was something like that. What I've drawn the analogy of as if you think of domino toppling or something. And then we look for parallels, and we look at the evidence in the World Trade Center. We can find bent beams that are bent into a horseshoe shape. This is all on www.drjudywood.com. All the pictures are there, available for public scrutiny. Bent beams, we've got cars which are turned upside down, we've got pictures of weird fires where we've got a huge car fire next to paper that's not burning. We've had cars exploding before the towers came down.
Which of course happened at the Pentagon with
Yes.
the paper sitting there.
There was some weird paper and fire effects at the Pentagon too, but not quite as pronounced at the World Trade Center. We've got 1,400 toasted cars. Some of them are half a mile from the World Trade Center on FDR Drive. Witnesses levitated. I've got 2 video accounts of people being levitated at the scene. And what Dr. Wood drew the analogy to is something called the Hutchison effect, because all of these effects, without exception, are seen in Canadian researcher John Hutchison's anti-gravity experiments. He's seen steel turning to dust, he's seen stainless steel rusting, he's seen weird fires coming out of nowhere when he sets his energy beams going, he's seen things levitated, and he's got a 3-inch solid copper beam which has been bent into a horseshoe shape, and it's precisely the same pattern as the World Trade Center steel.
So what is the Hutchison effect?
The Hutchison effect is what John Hutchison has been experimenting with for about almost 30 years. He was working to reproduce the experiments of Nikola Tesla, who we know was looking at things like radiant energy, wireless transmission of power, transmitting energy at a distance. Tesla invented radio essentially before Marconi. And John Hutchison became interested in that, trying to reproduce the experiment, so he got some Tesla coils, he got some other RF equipment, radio frequency equipment, radar equipment, and he was beaming these samples into an area to try and see what happened.
Beaming, what kind of beaming?
Microwave energy. He had old radar equipment which would generate a beam to, use for the radar scanning. Yeah, basically electromagnetic radiation of various frequencies, various kinds. He ends up using 2 tons of equipment, and initially his early experiments were a bit haphazard, and only about 10% of the time he'd set the thing up, fiddle with it, wouldn't work. That was in sort of 1980s time frame. As he realised how to tweak the equipment over time, he can now produce effects within about 5 minutes. And he's done this repeatedly. He's been filmed on various documentaries.
This effect is?
It's a combination of effects. We call it the Hutchison effect, but it's actually several. One of the primary things which is very interesting, looked at by Boyd Bushman, who was at Lockheed Martin, is levitation. In other words, you can have a wrench on a piece of wood, he sets the energy beams going, leaves them going for half an hour with his equipment, and the thing will fly up, literally fly up.
Will the wrench fly up, or will the wood holding the wrench fly up?
No, the wood won't, only the wrench will.
Right, so that's going to be argued as magnetic effects. Just a lot of positive magnetic field.
It does seem to have the effects are selective on the materials. In other words, not all the materials are affected. So steel might be affected, plastic wouldn't. But it's the effects on metals which are the most interesting, because all the effects on metals, what we call jellification, where it appears that the metal has turned to jelly and sort of just...
It breaks the crystal structure
Yeah,
of the metal.
it breaks down the crystalline structure, but then when the energy is switched off, it will reform and become solid again. And John Hutchison has got 500 pounds of metal samples. Dennis Kucinich has even been sent a sample. These are all available for people to look at. It's not some conspiracy theory. This is evidence. And without exception, we can see a match in the World Trade Center evidence to the phenomena that John has observed in this experiment. We've got the upside down cars, levitating witnesses, horseshoe bent beams, steel turning to dust, weird fires, all of these that John has
Okay, the steel turned to dust. What about all the other metals and things in there?
Well, most of the top 90 stories of the buildings, all of it turned to dust. I mean, think of the toilets. If you've got a building which has fallen down, this is Dr. Wood's key example, porcelain toilets are very visible because they're very white in the debris. There may be something like 2,000 toilets in the World Trade Center. Where were they in the rubble? In fact, there was almost no rubble. You look at Ground Zero in the afternoon of 9/11 from the pictures on Dr. Wood's site.
What about the computers?
Yeah, exactly.
All
gone.
The carpets?
Yeah, everything
Stuff like
turned
that.
to dust. Everything turned to dust, and you can see this in the videos if you go and replay them. Everything turned to dust. So what can do that? What can do it with a cold process? And we think again it's some type of nuclear reaction which they've set off. But it's not a nuclear reaction in terms of a fission or a fusion, it's molecular dissociation. and we think it's still ongoing, and that's what John Hutchison has experienced.
What do you mean it's still ongoing? Do you think that the material in the area is still the
Yes,
same?
no building on the World Trade Center site. No building on the World Trade Center site.
Yeah, there's a bit of a row about that.
Yes, correct. They're now saying it's going to be 20 years before they can build on the site again. But they're talking about that for investment reasons, I think, rather than it being a problem with the actual physical site. But Bankers Trust also called the Deutsche Bank building. That was opposite the World Trade Center, only like 100 feet away from the World Trade Center. As the cloud of material was coming down as the towers were being turned to dust, some of that cloud impinged onto the Bankers Trust and it got a gash out of the side of it. You can see this in the pictures. FEMA reported there was no fire in the Bankers Trust building. But again, we've got bent beams, crinkled beams, all kind of stuff in the Bankers Trust building. That was repaired. They took out all the damaged areas, they repaired the building, and then they said it was ready to be used. 2006, there were these weird fires in the building. 2007, they started to take the building down, piece by piece, not by controlled demolition, and they're down to about 10 stories or so now.
So do you think that's more forensic?
I think the building has become infected. In other words,
the material is contagious.
Yeah, somehow this nuclear reaction, it's like a low-level nuclear reaction where the material continues to break down at a low rate. We think that is still ongoing in the Bankers Trust.
What about the people in the building? They all vanished.
Yes, a lot of them did. A lot of them did, and we've even got some witness accounts of that happening, where some guys were in World Trade Center 6, a group of 3 guys walking along trying to get out of the building, poof, one of them disappears as the building is destroyed. So we have got that sort of evidence in the witness accounts if you look for it.
So when
Well, the definitive statement is we're being lied to, enslaved and controlled in so many ways. I would really ask people to look at 9/11 and look at the evidence that I've talked about, because I think it essentially proves what a lot of the other people would call conspiracies. It proves it beyond any shadow of a doubt to anyone who's got a mind open enough to look at the evidence. You must follow the evidence and be sure that it is, try and validate it across referencing from different sources, don't just take one source.
but it also cracked up to a much higher level of sophistication.
It does, yes, very much so. We're looking at a global group which is doing this for some reason. Have they been here for thousands of years? Quite possibly. I don't know. But take chemtrailing, weather control, that ties into 9/11. Investigate that connection. Then you will learn more about what's going on.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.